now that we got Diana MR out in the wild with a lot of people around the world using it, there's a couple things we should talk about. And one of them is the system. And I know we talked about in the past that Diana MR is easier to drive, relatively speaking, to all our other headphones.
Right.
It's not easy to drive like some headphones out there where 1 milliwatt of power, 1 nanowatt will give you full volume.
Well, some IEMs, they're crazy.
Yeah, like it takes like negligible, like no power, No, still.
There's an issue here, though, because I think it's easy to misunderstand the width of efficiencies and power requirements for headphones. It goes from, you could drive this with like a toothbrush 5 feet away, not even plugged in,
solar
to
power.
Basically you need like a nuclear power plant right next to it. There's a very, very large range
On headphones.
in headphones.
Yeah.
Some of them you could power with literally anything. Other ones you could power with basically nothing.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, like we talked about using dongle decks like this Woo Audio Tube Mini, which is really, really cool, actually. But it's a big dongle. And it draws some power, too. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Well, and if you watch our video, it's sensitive to what you plug it into.
Yeah.
You need enough
we'll get
power.
into a little bit. And then you got your typical dongle, which is like this. Now, you compare like this to this. Now, this device, this USB dongle, does the same thing as these do.
Functionally, yeah.
You hook it up to a computer on one end, a cable goes into a USB or whatever, right? So you come digital out of the computer, and it has a DAC in it, a digital analog converter, which is this bottom box here is a DAC, all right? And it has a headphone amplifier in it inside of this, which this top unit here is a headphone amplifier. So this is a 2-piece desktop setup for headphones. This is all in one. Obviously, when you compare size, there's got to be a lot more going on here than there is here. Now, they both will take the digital signal, digital audio off your laptop, your iPad, whatever, and give you a signal out that will drive a headphone. And now we get into when you get into the higher end of things, now we're talking about more nuanced stuff, like how well does it drive it? How good does the bass sound? How much better can it get? And when you get into this multi-$1,000 range of headphones, the headphone will play to a very, very high level of music reproduction. And basically your limitation is going to be the electronics. So let's try to explain a little bit of that. Like, what's the first thing you could think of on
Well, the thing is there's so many different dongles now, and they all act different depending on the load, right?
And they look so similar.
Yeah, right.
It's a little stick
No
you plug in your phone. You're like, well, what's the difference?
And we've also found that the specs don't really tell you anything either.
Not necessarily.
I mean, sometimes they're accurate, but other times,
even with desktop amps, it's the same thing.
True.
You get a power rating, but it's like, well, the one amp could sound way bigger than the other, and it's rated lower. So it's like, it's kind of the norm when it comes to amplification. Remember back in the day with power amplifiers?
Oh, yeah.
1,000 watts a channel.
It's still like that.
You measure it, it's 40.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you're lucky on a good day with 14.5 volts going on.
But it's still like that in audio. A little less extreme than that for sure. But you see people that inflate the numbers by 2 to 4 times sometimes. And they also present these numbers in a misleading way on occasion.
Yeah, they call it peak power and all that.
Yeah.
But bottom line is that, unfortunately, typically in the lower end of things, you got to try it,
Pretty much.
or go by what other people tell you that said, hey, this works with this. It works, no problem. And even that is kind of, it depends on what they're used to listening to. Like, there's a couple things to look at here. Like one thing I found in talking to customers about using dongles with headphones is some people think that they got a dongle and they're good to go. It worked with whatever they were using before, and now it's going to work now. And the reality of it is, as soon as you change up the headphone on the dongle, you may start hearing the limitations of the dongle.
Yeah. Some of them just cut out and they, run out of power and turn off.
Or they distort.
The classic issue with dongles, because they are power constrained and they're trying to be small, lightweight, cheap, they usually run out of power. So the specs may not tell you at all. It depends on what you plug it into, potentially even the cable used.
Well, those are 2 key factors. These things don't have any power supply.
Right.
They rely on the computer or whatever you hook it up to for power. Now, a phone has a relatively small battery. A laptop, much larger battery. These things react to the size of the battery, the power supply.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Well, sometimes they suck so bad it doesn't matter what.
Right.
But the bottom line is like I know with the Woo Audio with this mini tube. I mean, it's very sensitive to how big the supply is. It doesn't like a phone.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be okay on a tablet. It's way better on a laptop or a full size desktop computer. So you could really because it's drawing so much juice. Right.
Well, yeah, and then like on phones in particular, iPhones, the Lightning was even more restricted. I don't know what it was.
Type
It's
C
like
better.
1.5 watts or something.
so
Is not a lot.
it was-
Type C on the iPhone 15, it's dramatically more power. So most of the dongles will work fine.
Yeah, we recommend if you're running dongles with anything that's up there, you should probably look for a Type C connector.
You need a phone that's able to put out the power, and either an iPhone 15 with Type C, or plenty of Android phones for some time have been able
Because
to put out more
the
power.
spec on that connector is 15 watts.
Yeah, it
right?
depends on how it's
or
limited.
whatever, way
Yeah.
more than
Yeah.
the typical.
Yeah, it depends on
Type
the
A.
implementation,
Yeah.
but usually it'll work better, and it really does depend on the individual device.
So that being said, I mean that's the variables. Now, when you get into a desktop system like this, where this is the 11 audio stuff, so we've got the KDAC on the bottom and the Broadway, and this system 2-piece is not inexpensive. I mean, I think it approaches $5,000 US. It's not inexpensive as a kit, all right? But it's a full out, separates, 2 separate pieces, full balanced, all that good stuff. Bottom line, though, is that each of these units has its own power supply.
Mm-hmm.
Like the DAC plugs into the wall, right? It doesn't rely on the
Well, yeah,
computer
you're
or
good
anything.
there. Yeah.
So again, the power supply is optimized to run this thing without any issues, whatever it's capable of doing.
You get a uniform experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and same
Yeah.
with an amplifier. When you buy a desktop amplifier, it has a power supply that goes with it. It either plugs in the wall, runs on some sort. It's usually plugs in the wall. There's not necessarily a battery, even though this one has batteries in it
Yeah,
as
it's
part
kind
of
of
the
an
supply.
unusual situation.
Yeah, it still plugs into the wall.
Right.
So bottom line is that when you go to a desktop system, all those limitations and variables with the dongles typically disappear.
Mostly.
You know, you're plugging into a relatively unlimited power source, the wall outlet.
Well, for headphones, yeah,
Yeah,
unlimited.
you don't need more than that
Yeah.
for headphones.
We should note the power amount we're talking about here is not really a lot,
No.
but the issue is compared to many low-cost dongles, it could be pretty demanding.
Yeah. So part of it's power supply. Now, if you have, like I said, you plug in and use the dongles into a desktop or something, it's probably going to be okay, but maybe not. Maybe the cable you're running was an Amazon special and it doesn't work well with it. You don't know.
With this, you just plug it right into a computer, and then that's
If you can avoid, right, the amount of power this thing draws, if you can avoid a cable and just plug it right in, although that's a lot of leverage on
We
it.
did a
Yeah.
video about this
It's a little
before,
scary.
but
Yeah, we
you
got a
would think-
dongle video.
you would think in, I'm talking about the cables, you would think in short length it wouldn't really matter that much.
Ah.
However, cables has nothing to really do with like sound or whatever, or price even. From a power delivery perspective, there could be a massive range on small, little, trivial, cheap cables.
Some of these cheap cables use some tiny
They
wires.
use itty bitty microscopic
really
wire.
tiny conductors. And I
Yeah.
mean, even a foot of it would just trash your ability to get power
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
It could be a big
You
issue
know,
because
it's
these are running
surprising.
5 volts. So at 5 volts, you don't have a lot of room for resistance to not impact the
Yeah,
power
it's looking for
delivery.
current
Yeah, that's the other
primarily.
problem, yeah.
It needs current.
Only 5 volts.
And when you do a tiny wire or multiple wires,
Mm-hmm.
especially as it gets longer, that cable's going to completely restrict the
I mean, it got so
ability
bad
to get
that
current.
we had to get a tester. We test all the cables now for USB because
Yeah.
some just don't meet spec and some are.
You could look at the cable and you think, well, maybe I know this is a good cable because it looks like it is. There
Well,
not that much correlation.
What
actually.
we've learned when you get to a level where you want reliability is spend a little more on the cables.
Usually
You know,
better,
you go try to find like a brand name. Like there's a couple
Yeah.
brands on Amazon that are really good. I can't think
Yeah.
of. Can you think of anything off the top of your head?
I don't know. The Amazon
Cables
basic one
matter.
is good.
Cables
Cable
matter.
I usually
right?
like those. Those are
Yeah,
pretty good. Or
right.
like a Belkin.
Yeah. I mean, they actually are trying to make a decent cable at a
Yeah.
at a reasonable price, and it's going to be a couple bucks more, but it's well worth it because you won't have the issues. You won't have as many issues. Let's just say that.
Generally.
Yeah, right. You know, in general. But yeah. Anyway, back to the gear. So anyway, first of all, when we say, well, you could use a dongle with these with the Dynamar, yes, it'll work fine. But if you're looking to play at higher volume levels, you want dynamics, you want impact, you want you want to hear the capabilities of this headphone. This isn't going to do the same thing as that, and and even this is still a small headphone system relative,
Yes.
because you could get like a Woo WA33. It's a 60-pound headphone amp, all tube.
Yeah, well, that's next level.
And something like a DCS DAC, drop another 20, 30,000 on a DAC.
You could. Yep.
But yeah, that's pretty
Now
far.
we're talking,
pretty
baby.
far from this.
If you pick one of the best dongles for your particular application, for what you're plugging it into and your headphone, you could get a great experience near desktop. However, any old dongle, maybe not.
Yeah. And you're almost always with a dongle, you're going to run out of steam. Most of them are less than a few hundred milliwatts. A few
Most are
tenths.
under 100, actually.
Yeah.
So.
We're
Some
talking-
rate really high, but it's very misleading.
But we're talking a tenth of a watt
Right.
versus a real desktop will do watts. So,
Yeah, 10, 20 times
yes,
that.
you're right. That's a lot. That's a huge difference, especially when you're talking about dynamics of the music, headroom, the ability for the sound just doesn't seem to run out of power
Well,
when
and
you get to a bigger amp.
That's the thing. Even if it can play it to decent volumes, you're usually maxed out on some dongles. It's like it
You're at the
works,
top.
but you're like, I got nothing left.
Yeah,
It's
you're
giving it all.
full out volume.
Yeah.
Well, some sound pretty good. You could be cranked on the volume, and maybe it won't be that loud, but it'll sound fine. Some, you go half volume, 3/4 volume, they start distorting, they get grungy, they sound bad.
It all depends on the recording too. Like I've seen some recordings that are just quieter in nature.
Yeah.
Especially a lot of this stuff's being converted from digital and all that and DSD files. They're doing a lot of stuff to dumb down music to go on streaming services nowadays as quickly as possible. And I mean, usually I think that stuff's mostly level match, but I've seen tracks where I'm turning up the volume on a desktop unit, because
Yeah,
it's just
sometimes.
quiet.
Mm-hmm.
It's just quiet for what the recording was like that, and they didn't average it out. Or I don't know what happened, but maybe that's the way it was supposed to be. I think some music too, if you average for a peak, right?
Right.
There might be a second somewhere in that
Yeah.
track where there's a peak, and bam, that's where this computer sets the peak level, right? Because you can't go above 0 dB,
Well,
otherwise you
yeah.
blow everything.
Well.
Everything goes to hell in audio when you exceed a digital 0, right?
Yeah,
So-
because on our Apple TV in the shop that we play music on, they have a level match thing that you can turn on and off. And it works most of the time, but sometimes randomly it's like
Gets loud as hell.
Yeah. Whoa.
I wonder how it
doesn't-
works. What's it looking at?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's
It can't
it's a
look at
little
the whole song.
Yeah, I
you
don't know.
would think,
It's a little
but
inconsistent.
maybe
though.
the beginning 10 seconds. I don't know.
And then sometimes stuff's
I don't know if they look
randomly
at-
really quiet.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's fine. But some tracks it's just
Yeah.
so I don't know what it's doing.
It can only look at what it's got buffered, so yeah. Anyway, but yeah, bottom line is that there's variables involved with even
It's
the
complicated.
sources,
Yeah.
the source you're using. And even the DAC, like in this case, everything's built in. So the levels should be okay. But when you get with separates, and let's say you run separates, like a separate DAC, a separate headphone amp, and you get them from two different companies, the DACs have different output levels. Some are lower,
Yeah.
some are higher. And both can cause issues when you run them into an amplifier from a different company.
Well, then you got a whole different thing.
You know,
Sometimes
could be quiet, could be loud.
they have fixed output or a variable output. You don't even think. You
Yeah.
know, that you got to turn up your DAC volume and your headphone amp volume. It's
Yeah.
like, why is it so quiet?
So I
Ran
mean,
into
and,
that.
and it's not that complicated.
No.
But it's a setup issue. So when you first get something like this, if you've never set it up, get someone who can help you set it up properly.
Read the instructions.
It's not that much more time consuming, and once it's done properly, you're good to go. You could pretty much run just about any headphones with it. So, and that's another feature to look at too, with like more of this style versus a dongle, is you get into more of a universal nature for being able to play
Well,
music.
Yeah.
You might decide you want to have 2 or 3 different headphones for different things you want to listen to, or for whatever. Maybe you like one headphone with movies and the other one for your music. So it's nice to have a system that'll play all that with multiple choices of headphones. It has enough power for more demanding headphones, and it's quiet and clear and great for the headphones or IEMs or whatever that don't require power. So you have a lot more bandwidth to go with typically with a desktop, to a point. And again, you got to watch that though too, because if you get this huge honking tube amp, right, that's this big, it's actually not really going to be great on a very sensitive something that needs a
Right.
tiny little
Yeah.
amount
The
of
opposite
power.
problem,
You
yeah.
don't go that way. It's like putting a V8 engine in a go-kart. It's just not going to work.
Well, it'll work. But,
So you do have to watch it, and that's when you get into the higher end of things where people actually will build a system around a particular headphone, which makes sense.
So you want enough power, but not too much power?
That's right.
Sometimes.
For that particular headphone and for your use case and for the music you listen to.
Very straightforward.
Simple. Yeah.
right.
Ask people in the know. Call us, email us.
It should be easier, but
Anyway, yeah.
I mean, well, that is the thing the dongle has the advantage of. It's the all-in-one. There's nothing to fiddle with. So that, for some people, that's what you want.
I think it's a great start.
if you get the right dongle, they work
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, a decent dongle is a great start. I mean, look to spend a few $100s on one.
Well,
It's a great start.
not only that, what if you're not home?
Oh, right.
I mean,
As
that's,
in,
yeah.
you're moving.
You're moving, yeah.
You travel.
You can't take
Well, it's tough-
something plugged into the wall.
It's tough to beat that.
with you in your pocket.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and you pretty much that's the way to go, And you might have to rock through a few of them till you find one you like, because they do, like we said before, all these USB dongles, just like all the desktops,
Yeah, they do totally different
they
things.
do very different, sound very different. Dongles have limitations.
Different limitations on
Right.
each one too.
Yeah, right, true.
So
Yeah, some are dull sounding, some are thin, no bass. Some just distort, like have volume. They don't. I don't even know how to describe distortion. It's like listening to music while riding. What would you call it? With big tires through mud. It seems like mud spitting at you while you're listening to music. That's what the distortion
wouldn't
is.
be how I say it, but all right.
It's just like, what is wrong with this? It just sounds like like you're listening to a speaker in a bag of chips while you're crushing them.
Okay.
But anyway,
yes.
yeah, that's distortion for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we had enough of that. So there you have it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Get the
simple,
right
straight-
dongle.
as always, straightforward and
Very easy and clear cut.
Yeah, it's simple. Yeah. See, what we got to do is we got to find some dongles we got to put on our website for sale that we
Cheap
know work.
dongles
Yeah.
that work good.
Cheapdongles.com.
Cheapdongles.com.
Anyone own that?
might exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patent pending. I don't know.
Thanks everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves.